This video contains strong language, used in a funny context. Viewer discretion advised.
While there are plenty of great games and quite a large portion of titles that are simply average, there are fortunately very few completely irredeemable and atrocious titles.
Some video games have become well known for negative reception for various reasons, such as criticism about their gameplay, graphics, sound, or other elements.
So prepare yourself for the long-awaited, the shit-tastic, the top 100 worst video games.
This is the top 100 worst video games. Number 100. Stalin vs. Martians.
This game is supposed to be a real-time strategy, but instead it's a buggy, unplayable mess with bad design decisions, suffering from stupid AI, bad enemy placement, crap mission structure, and no attempts at humor. That music videos were produced for the game failed to make an impact.
Number 99. Virtuoso.
Virtuoso was a hilariously bad shooter. It's hard to figure out what kind of game it is anyways, mainly since the combination of horrible graphics and a terrifyingly bad camera. Maybe that was a good thing, since the game was terrible altogether. The enemies are generic. Let's see here, we have spiders, bats, giant spiders, more bats, and a giant spider boss. What the hell are they thinking?
Number 98. Crush Hour.
Basically, the game's plot is just ridiculous that it just sounds like a bad idea right off the bat. So the premise of the game is completely simple. Some of the top WWE superstars driving around in cars just trying to destroy each other. Crush Hour plays a lot like other car combat games out there. In fact, it plays very much like a stripped down, simplistic version of Twisted Metal. When it comes to graphics and sound, Crush Hour just begins to fall apart. Everything in the game feels extremely rushed and underpolished. The game itself isn't the worst video game on the list, but it's still up there. It's only for die-hard WWE fans, and for everyone else, they should just play Twisted Metal instead.
Number 97. Spirit of Speed, 1937.
Spirit of Speed, or at least its Dreamcast version, was meant to simulate the 30s Roadsters race. The game was routinely trashed for its atrocious loading times, bad controls, lack of multiplayer mode, and mediocre production values and boring drawn-out tracks. Quite fittingly, Acclaim briefly resurrected the much-revealed LJN label for this game only.
Number 96. Bomberman Act Zero.
Gone are all the cool-looking characters from the previous games, and instead you get big, futuristic-looking robots who all act the same way. Gone also is the over-the-top head view, and instead you get a camera which is placed behind the Bomberman you control. The gameplay is basically the same, but in a 3D environment as you run around past giant blocks placing your bombs to kill all your enemies. Although generally considered as a classic Bomberman, Act Zero gets boring really fast, and for a 360 game, the graphics are not that good at all. Do not attempt to buy it, not even for your gamer score.
Number 95. Two Worlds.
Two Worlds is an absolute failure in just about every respect on the Xbox 360. Two Worlds offers up a fairly impressive and certainly huge graphical environment for the player to run rampant throughout. The desire to do so is swiftly fractured by frequent screen freezes, while the game engine struggles to process the next open expanse. With some horrible voice acting and facial and movement animation, many players wondered if this game was surely classed as a next-generation game. While some reviews across the internet do sum up some of the best features of the game, the huge ton of drawbacks place this game on this list for the sole reason: get Oblivion or Skyrim instead.
Number 94. Leisure Suit Larry, box office bust.
The original set of Leisure Suit Larry games were intelligent, tongue-in-cheek adventure titles. But with box office bust, the moronic generation had to have its own input. The game seems to have been written by someone that thinks swearing is funny just on its own merit and is completely missing the point of the original game's appeal. Rather than being an adventure game, Box Office Bust has you running around a movie studio taking part in the world's worst platform game. Without a doubt, one of the worst next-gen games available, with nearly no redeeming qualities or interesting ideas, with next to nothing enjoyable to offer players. With no circumstance should anyone ever purchase this game, ever.
Number 93. VIP.
Oh god. The whole game is based either on controller directions or button controls. They pop up on the screen and you press a button within a time limit. Once the correct buttons are pressed, then you see a very sloppy animation between the characters. Some parts of the game lets you use firearms, but all you get is a cursor, which you move and shoot. The game itself doesn't take too long to complete, about 2 hours worth, and that's it. The game suffers from bad animation, and the characters look poorly designed. VIP doesn't really offer any enjoyment or hardly any replay value, and by the end of it, your hands will be aching. Enjoy.
Number 92. Gods and Generals.
Gods and Generals is the result of hopelessly misguided effort to produce something that would be a marketing tool first and a game second. The game suffered from poor frame rate, lack of a proper physics engine, and horribly broken AI. The combination of horrible AI and physics would often lead enemies running into walls with a futile attempt to get away from the player. At other times, enemies would not activate properly, leading them to stand motionless while the player just shot them to death.
Number 91. Operation Matriarchy.
This game has one of the strangest storylines to ever show up in an FPS game ever, where a virus turns all of the women in some space colony into a hive of men enslaving monsters. Your character wakes up from a sleep capsule. The game looks particularly good, except suffers from a huge amount of problems. These include enemies that are dumb as bricks. There's no decent AI behavior, meaning they just rush the player mercilessly. The extremely cramped level design makes fighting and navigating extremely confusing and frustrating, and the animations are simply laughable. The sound effects are annoying, and there's absolutely no music at all.
Number 90. Legend of Success Joe.
A horrible excuse of a boxing game based on the manga anime Ashita Nojo. The gameplay alternates between very primitive beat-em-up segments in which Joe fights a few wimpy enemies that die in one punch before fighting a very long boss, and boxing matches based on famous battles of the series. The controls are clunky and unresponsive, the music sounds like shit, and, even though this game was produced for one of the most powerful systems of the early 1990s, the graphics are ugly with an over-bright color palette, non-existent animation, hunchbacked character sprites. It was one of the few early Neo Geo titles that stayed in Japan for good reason.
Number 89. Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green.
Before the Left 4 Dead series, there was this awful prequel to a pretty bad George Romero movie, with graphics that belonged on a system that belonged on the Famicom, controls being clunky, technical bugs, strange glitches, and AI that manages to make the zombies look even more stupid and dumb than they were supposed to be. Fiddler's Green may be the worst undead first-person shooter ever made.
Number 88. Bruce Lee, Quest of the Dragon.
Now this is one of gaming's greatest tragedies. You take a legend kung fu star and put him in a punch and kick game. The graphics are good, but not good enough. The controls are great and the game is pretty fun. For about 5 minutes. Once you get to the third level, it gets really repetitive. Punching and kicking is the same generic thing over and over and over again. There's nothing redeeming about this game other than the picture of Bruce Lee on the cover. Don't even think about renting or playing this, otherwise you'll offend the legend himself.
Number 87. Zuzervezzer.
Vusar Vasar is a racing game with a stupidly ridiculous premise. Basically, it's a racing competition where floating chariots are carried by giant animal-shaped humongous mech ship. We couldn't make it up if we tried. And yes, this game is terrible. The graphics are horrendously pixelated and full of clipping, even though the game ran on the Sega Dreamcast. The controls are bad because you couldn't slow down the vehicle or even stop. The racetracks have laser turrets which are expressly designed to fire on you for no explained reason whatsoever. It's not hard to see why it didn't even leave Japan.
Number 86. Fight Club.
The fact that this game is broken goes without saying. But there's also the fact that for some reason the game features Fred Durst, and if you don't know who Fred Durst is, he's the frontman of Limp Bizkit, as well as the director of movies. In fact, he has nothing to do with this movie, or the book for that matter, and if you ignore the fact that Fight Club ties into the movie and novel and consider it purely on its merits as a game, what you're left with is an undercooked fighting game, not much better looking than a steaming pile of dog shit. And when you also consider the game's botched attempts at including some tie-ins with the movie, the results look even worse.
Number 85. Bad Day LA.
Bad Day LA manages to combine everything people dislike about video games with inappropriate toilet humour, supposedly as social commentary. It's hard to believe that it came from the same company that gave us the American Mickey's Alice as a decade earlier. Stupid gameplay, bland graphics, and bad controls ending up being a completely boring title.
Number 84. Dragon Ball Z Sagas Evolution.
Beginning players will probably get frustrated with the skills needed to control a hero, while experienced players may not be impressed with the bland level design and low-resolution graphics. Camera angles don't even change throughout, making for a predictable and boring gaming experience. The environments feel bland and the level layout is completely and equally uninspired. To sum it up, there's just not much to recommend here, especially considering the fact that Sagas is a full-priced game.
Number 83. Stargazer.
The background graphics make no attempt to blend with the tiles, and when combined with the dark, dull Palais choice, it ends up looking abysmal. The battle system is clunky, slow, and unforgiving. Select the wrong battle option? Too bad, there's no button to back it up. So the game is so bad that Japanese fans have given it the title of Legendary Shit Game.
Number 82. Virtual Bart.
All the flaws and annoyances from Bart's Nightmare can be found in this game, only that this time they are, if possible, even worse. We have to play more mini-games, only that this time they suck even more. The mini-games are highly imaginative and all of them could have been great, but the controls are terrible and the few that have decent controls are boring as hell. Virtual Bart is only for hardcore Simpsons fans.
Number 81. Hour of Victory.
World War II shooters have become a genre unto themselves thanks to the popularity of the Medal of Honor and Call of Duty franchise. But when a wannabe upstart like Hour of Victory comes along from Midway Games, you have to realize why there are so many World War II titles and so many reasons why not to play them. The visuals in this game are subpar to say the least. Hour of Victory has graphics that look like they were drawn by a kid who messed with his coloring book. The audio is laughable, the physics are terrible, and the frame rate is choppy, making the game look far worse than it already does. This game needed a lot more than just polish to it. It needed to go straight back to the drawing board.
Number 80. 3D Balls.
The setting for the game is pure gibberish, random phrases and weird photos, but what destroys this game is the controls. It makes it unplayable that you have no idea how to control your fighter. The AI, however, has no problem controlling its fighters and will wipe the floor with you. The music and sounds are strange, almost erotic, with girls moaning and guys grunting.
Number 79. Rondi.
Rondi is infamous for killing off the Majin Tensei branch of the Megami Tensei franchise, and its preview demo alone caused such a negative reaction that thousands of Japanese gamers cancelled their pre-orders for the game on a scale that was virtually unprecedented in Japanese game history. It would take another 12 years for Megaten fans to see a strategy RPG in the franchise with the release of Devil Survivor. Hardcore Gaming 101 said that the game has some of the ugliest graphics for the 32-bit era.
Number 78. Isle of the Dead.
Isle of the Dead is a strong contender for the worst FPS of all time. Coming out the same year as Doom, its engine is more on the level of Wolfenstein 3D. Right from the start, the game offers enemies which can tear the player to pieces in seconds and respawn right after you leave the room. The graphics and sound are horrible, with nothing at all to tell the player where to go, and the difficulty is way too hard. To top it all off, quitting the game is referred to as the coward's way out in the menu, and even more so, you're greeted with a graphic depiction of a shotgun suicide.
Number 77. Creep Clash.
Oh my god, you guys are never gonna believe this. Creep Crash is a 2D fighting game that pits 3D polygons against one another in a battle to reign as the next lord of Necrovania. So what it comes down to is a jumbled mess of fighters, which is terrible to look at, horrible to play, and excruciating to listen to. Creep Clash features MIDI background music and a lengthy graphical introduction with still pictures and digital voiceovers, which none of them really matter as much as you're probably searching for the uninstall button right about now.
Number 76. Hooters Road Trip.
With a terrible soundtrack featuring tunes like Candy Pants and nearly unmanageable auto controls, it's a wonder this game got out of the gate at all. Gameplay-wise, you'll be motoring a slow, ugly polygon model that breaks down all the time and is quite likely to explode at random intervals. Enjoyment is hard to come by in a game like this because of the frequent crashing. Road Trip is a horrid, wretched, abysmal excuse for a racer.
Number 75. Winter Race 3D.
Playing an old, somewhat obscure, low-budget game, you can't expect much, really. Amateur 3D models, fuzzy textures, constant bugs, lazy sound design, no music, and only 5 levels to play. Gameplay-wise is frustrating, especially when you're timed against the clock. Hitting anything in the game will make the player bounce around 90 degrees to a random angle. Sometimes you might get caught in a single area because you keep hitting some tree or wall all the time. Winter Race 3D is a very poor, lazy, and lacking low-budget winter sports game that you should definitely stay away from. There are far better sports racing games out there than try this.
Number 74. Ninja Bread Man.
Ninja Bread Man isn't simply bad, it's fucking atrocious. A platformer game that looked like it was made in less than a day, with incredibly bland textures, especially for the Wii. This is the kind of game you'll see real cheap in the bargain bins, fellas. It's still not worth your purchase, and there are a lot of better games that handle and look a lot better than this fucking mess.
Number 73. Highlight.
Unfortunately, regardless of whether the game was any good on earlier systems, it was borderline unplayable on the NES, complete with hints on porting disaster. The graphics were bland and the music was an annoying loop. The battle mechanics were practically non-existent, often resulting to charging at enemies pressing A. There were no clues anywhere of what to do or where to go, and the in-game save feature was useless because the cartridge did not have a battery.
Number 72. Hard Driven.
Hard Driven was horrible in every department. The graphics looked like it was made of Lego, the screeching of the tires was unbearable, and the gameplay was pure hell. Maybe the name of the game was appropriately named, as the vehicle you use handled more like a semi-truck than a car. In summary, Hard Driven was labelled as a terrible driving game and one that all should avoid at all costs.
Number 71. Universal Combat.
Universal Combat is a budget game. Yeah, so if that didn't turn you off right away, then listen to this. It had an intense amount of hype surrounding it for many reasons, and we honestly expected it to be a lot better than it was. The textures are bland and appear to be incredibly low resolution, especially on the planet and when viewing the planet from space. The sound is bland, and the Vox systems can be annoying as hell. Virtually every shooter made in the last decade looks and plays far better than Universal Combat. Glitchy problems such as bitmapped foliage and trees that you can walk through, and the game has absolutely no sense of physics whatsoever. So you could witness your squad walking up and down sheer cliff faces. How does that happen?
Number 70. Total Recall.
A massive disappointment then that for the game based on the film, everything had to go so wrong. Rather than simply taking the plot and trying to translate it, the game developers decided to create a rubbish platform game that bears no relation to either the film or the book it's based on. The only thing that the film and the game share are the name. Add to that the fact that it's impossible to play because of the unresponsive control system and the appalling graphics. It's one of the worst games ever.
Number 69. Speed Rage.
This forgetful attempt at a driving game will give you a serious headache in just under a minute. It's basically a shamble of bright colors, fast-paced gameplay with ridiculous animations, especially the car wheels. The game arrow doesn't help, and it's more of a hindrance than anything, because 98% of the time you don't know where the hell you're driving and what's around the next corner. A failure of a driving game in all categories. Man, I'm getting pissed off here, aren't I?
Number 68. Rushing Punch.
Rushing Punch is one of those hypnotically bad games. The ones where your mind is telling you that it's awful, but you cannot put the controller down, because you just want to get over with and beat it. Rushing Punch is a 3D final fight gone horribly, horribly wrong. You take your character and punch and kick your way through the same type of, three enemies over and over again, until you fight a boss. Everyone walks around in the comical manner, which gives the impression they're dancing to the surprisingly catchy music. The enemies all bunch up together and attack at once, which is annoying. There's no menu system, no game over screen, and when you beat it, the game simply ends. You drop back to the dashboard and that's it. Just ignore this game like it's the plague.